All right, so we've had our programming talks, we've had our art talk, we've had our Unity intro talk, and so now I'm going to talk about design. And design's going to be more of an abstract kind of thing. So there's not going to be any hands-on part of this talk at all. It's all going to be conceptual because we already talked about the Unity stuff. So the role of the designer is an interesting one. Because we always talked, the past several years, we've always talked about how there's like the trifecta of game design, where there's the artist, the programmer, and the designer. And that's kind of true, but there's also not quite as much the case, because the designer is kind of a special thing, because the designer has to be all of the things. But we'll get into that shortly. So as for design specifically, there's a lot involved, but I'm going to focus on 3 different aspects today. That's game conception, level design, and fun. So these kind of are the core aspects of what the designer focuses on when he's making a game. Obviously, the conception is the actual making, the coming up with the idea part, which everyone's going to get to do plenty of on Friday for the game jam. The level design is the most colloquial thing that comes to mind when you say a designer. That's usually what comes to mind, is a level designer, someone who actually makes the places that you play, like the places that your characters in your games are. And then fun is an interesting one as well, because that's something that a lot of people forget about. I know in our year of the minor, we made a lot of really technically cool things and like really good art and really good programming, but a lot of us kind of forgot about the fun, and that's something that's really bad because games are supposed to be fun. that's why you're all here, right? You guys like fun games, right? Yeah. Okay. So conception with smaller teams, which is pretty much everything you're going to be working with here at MSU. Everyone is involved with the conception process. So everyone gets together and they all bounce ideas off of each other. So this is not as much a designer-only thing here, though when you get out into the industry, if you're working for a company, there's a team that does this, and there's like a team of designers that come up with the idea. So, and there's no one single idea guy. And you can't get anywhere if all you do is come up with ideas. You have to have skills to back that up as well. But we'll get into that more later. But this is kind of an iterative process. So it's not just one conception and then you have a game that's perfect already. It takes some time to. Thank you. It takes some time to. Not going to talk about that. It takes some time to come up with something good, and then you test it and you try it, and you go back and you think about it more. So this is kind of an example of how the cycle goes. So you come up with the concept, you prototype it, you test it, you get feedback on it, you try again. This arrow should actually go more to here, but basically, it takes several times through before you get something really good. And for a solid example of this is what this is. So in MI 497, which is the Game Design Studio course, that's the first semester, second year game design course in the minor. You have an entire semester to make a game with a team. And so you have a lot more time than you usually have, because in the first year you only have 5 or 6 weeks per game. So that gives you a lot more time to think and come up with a really good idea. And you're also given a blank slate, pretty much. It's like they don't give you a theme, they don't give you any one thing you have to make. You have free reign to come up with games. So what I have here is actually a paper prototype. So the game that we're working on on my team, we're making a fighting game, but it's entirely based on cards. So like on this card, you probably can't really see it, but like there's like a direction, and then this K means kick. So everything's based on this. And what the paper prototype did for us is it allowed us to. This took maybe 10 minutes to make, And it allowed us to immediately have our game there in front of us, completely done, so that we can play it, test it out, and see if it's fun immediately, instead of spending 4 or 5 weeks making systems and then find out, oh, this isn't really a good idea. We don't really like this that much. So that's kind of what a prototype is for. And there's physical prototypes and there's digital prototypes. And you'll do some of both probably throughout your time here. I know in MI 445, the first game design course, they have you do paper prototypes of your games that you make on your first team project. So that's kind of it for the conception side. So then comes level design. Level design is, like I said, is the first thing that usually comes to mind when you think of design. But it's a lot harder than a lot of people expect. I know that when I first took a shot at level design, first thing I made was awful. Absolutely awful. I do not claim to be even close to good at level design at all, and I'm a designer. Level design is very interesting because you have to think through the way that your player will play. So you have to go through, you have to know the mechanics of the game, how your player moves, and what he can do in the environment, as well as what other enemies are in the environment. And you have to think about all of the possible scenarios for what's happening to make it fun. And it's very easy to make a level. Well, for example, how many of you have gotten or played Mario Maker since it just came out? Okay, not a lot. How many of you seen or watched some Mario Maker? Okay, so Mario Maker is actually a really cool thing because it gives a lot of people very easy access to practicing level design, because it's very easy to make something difficult, but just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's fun. So if you have jumps spaced out that are exactly the distance you can possibly make, but you have to time things exactly right, that's very difficult, and it'll take you a long time to get through it, but that's not necessarily fun. So you have to think about a lot of different things to make a level fun and interesting, and it's a lot harder than you expect at first attempt. I know in the minor, a lot of times level design gets pushed off a bit in favor of getting mechanics and things done, and then the levels end up being rushed and not that interesting. So I'm going to go on a kind of case-by-case basis with some of this to show you some good and bad examples of level design. So here's some good examples. So this is Mega Man X. And Mega Man X did a really interesting thing where it was taking a well-established series of games on the NES that all had the same mechanics, more or less, a very solid foundation, and it took that and expanded the mechanics, and with those new mechanics, it had to adjust the way that it built its levels. So, for example, new abilities, you get, in Mega Man X, you can wall jump, and you can dash. Those are the big new things that weren't in the original Mega Man on the NES, and that changed everything. So here you have slopes now, so you can keep dashing without having to stop and jump over a little ledge like you did in the original Mega Man. And there's also a lot more vertical levels that aren't nearly as frustrating as they used to be, because back in Mega Man 1. They had a Like-Man stage that was entirely vertical, and that was a nightmare. That was absolutely terrible, because it's really hard, it's really easy to mess up, and then you fall all the way back down, you have to do it all over again. But Mega Man X could do a lot more because it's a lot more generous, because it has the wall jumping now. And it also is an interesting thing to look at Mega Man X's intro level. The very first level you play when you start Mega Man X, it always takes you to this intro level, and everything in the intro level is very deliberate and very, very well thought out to teach the mechanics of the game just by playing. No text, no nothing, just everything's through playing. And I will There's a link later on to a video that talks a lot more about that and why Mega Man X is kind of amazing, which I'll get in, like, I'll have that link up later. And then the other example I have is Super Metroid. Super Metroid kind of operates under the similar thing where it's taking mechanics that already exist and still using them, but making them better, making them more polished, and expanding to have a lot more mechanics. So, Super Metroid. Super Metroid is, if you're not familiar, it's a very non-linear game. So nothing's laid out for you. You have to kind of find your way to where you're supposed to go. But in a way, it actually does lead you. At the very beginning of the game, you don't have any abilities. The entire side note, there's no like arbitrary unlocks of like doors or things by doing actions, other than to get to the final area, the final boss. The only places you can't get are the places you don't have the equipment to get yet. And so, but you can still see, like, you see doors you can't go through yet as you're going around. But then you have to remember to come back later and find whatever's behind that door once you have the ability to get through that door. But everything, so when you start the game, you have basically no abilities. You can jump, you can kind of shoot, that's about it. And that'll get you through blue doors. So there's several different colors of doors. They'll get you through blue doors, and that's it. You can't even like roll up into a ball. So your options are very limited. So when you start, there's only one way to go, and that'll take you to get your missiles that'll open red doors. It'll also take you to get the morph ball and the bombs that'll let you get through small passages. And then once you get those, you can get a lot more places, and that opens up the game. So if you want to explore now, you can. You have a lot of options to explore, but it also is you end up in the places that you need to be to get to the next place you have to get to the next boss, to get to the next area. The way that they line up everything, you end up being where you need to be, but you don't have to stay there. You can explore around, and a lot of the real appeal of Super Metroid is you can do a lot of things in a lot of different orders that seem like the way that the game was not intended to play, but in a way that's actually the designers thought of that and planned for all of these options, to the point that you can beat the game with getting 14 or 15% of the items just by doing tricks with the items that you have. So if you get good control of the items the items and the mechanics that you have, you can actually do a lot with it that you wouldn't expect to be able to do. Now for some bad level design. So we'll start with this one on the left. This, if you're probably not familiar, I don't know a lot of people that have heard of this. This is the Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring game for the Super Nintendo. This was made actually before the movies were, so it's based entirely on the books and the cartoon movie that happened that we don't really talk about. So what this game did is it's a top-down adventure game where all you do is you walk around and you like stab things, and you get items. And that's basically it, and you'd like talk to people too. And so this game didn't lay out things very clearly, and it reused a lot of assets, and it's a very big game. But they were able to do that because they reused a lot of assets, and particularly these caves are kind of awful. Like, these caves they all look the same. They all have this floor, these torches, and then the walls. Like, it all looks the same. And you end up with a lot of cases where they have the same pieces of areas, like fairly big pieces of areas. And then you start getting confused, thinking you're the same place you were before, and then you get lost. And this got so bad in playtesting that they ended up, in the actual instruction manual that came with the game, in the back, there were maps of all of the caves in the game, labeled with a letter, and then when you walk into the cave, you automatically pick up this note that says, you've entered cave C, entrance 1. And then you have to go and look on your map. And then you have to plot out how to get where you're trying to go. And that's how bad this level was laid out in that game. And then the other thing, if you can't tell, it's really, really small. This is Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. This is all of the stuff you need to know to beat Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. It doesn't tell you any of this. So you have, like, these are all things you have to do in a bunch of different orders. So you end up going through a lot of this several times, getting very cryptic hints from NPCs that say, bang your head on the cliffs at Deborah. And they never tell you what the cliffs of Deborah is and how to bang your head on them. But what they actually mean is equip the white crystal and kneel the red crystal and kneel right here in front of this cliff, because that's banging your head on it. So you have to go here and crouch for 5 seconds, and then something will teleport you. And none of this is explained to you at all, because all of the NPCs are really dumb. And Castlevania 2 has a lot of other problems too. There's plenty of people that will, if you just look it up on YouTube, there are plenty of people that rant about it. It does some things cool, and it does things really, really bad. Mostly bad. So now we get to talk about fun. Fun is a very tricky thing, because what's fun for some people is really, really not fun for other people. And it's impossible to tell what will be fun for a lot of people. So you have to try, and you don't want to make a game for everyone, because there's not a game in existence that everyone likes. There will be somebody that doesn't like any game you can come up with. So let's see some examples. What are some fun games that you guys like?
Metroidvania.
Metroidvania. Does anyone here not like Metroidvania games at all? You. Okay, let's see something else. What's another game type? A game or game type?
Character action, like Bayonetta.
Bayonetta. So just an action beat 'em up kind of game. Honestly, I don't like that much. What about something else? Yeah.
I don't really like fighting games.
You don't like fighting games. Okay.
I was just about to say fighting games.
There you go. There you go. Already done. Yeah.
League of Legends.
League of Legends. I don't like League of Legends.
First-person shooters.
First-person shooters. You'll find a lot of people that don't like those. So herein lies the problem of game design. It's impossible to please everyone. And you're like, a lot of people, when they're making something, they inherently want everyone to like it. And that's a natural reaction, but you have to realize that you have to keep your goal audience in mind. So you have to, when you're coming up with your idea, you have to decide who you're making, like what kind of people you're making this game for. And then you focus on that group. And even if it's kind of a small group, sometimes it can end up being a lot more people than you expect like it. But you're never going to make a game that everyone will like. So now I'm going to talk a bit about game design actually in the program. So game design is an interesting thing here. A lot of people, I know last year, some of the speakers would talk about how you don't like, they're like, don't be a designer. And I think that's bad, because design is a very important thing if it's done right. It's just a lot of people, like we end up sometimes with some people that want to be, they say they want to be designers, but they're actually just the idea guy that I was talking about earlier. Like they have a lot of ideas for games, but they don't know how to make them, and they don't really want to contribute to the actual making them. They just want to have someone make the game that they want to play. But in game design minor, everyone's a designer. Everyone takes up the roles of making a game fun and concepting a game. Maybe not level design. Some people will not contribute to level design, but sometimes everyone does on a project. But everyone is a designer in a sense, and everyone is working together to make your game fun and make your game good. But being an actually designated designer is kind of tricky, because to be a designer, you kind of have to have a grasp on everything. So I label myself as a designer at this point, but I come from a programming background. I went into the minor, when they had me write down what my role was, I put programmer. But designers kind of have to know everything. So you should have at least a little grasp on programming, so you can see that you can read the code that you're working with when you're putting things together, and even be able to write. It's good to be able to write code, so you don't have to be constantly asking a programmer for help. But you also kind of have to understand art and how art works, because if you're do I have another slide on this? Yeah. So we talked about the level design. Team lead is often a team lead is often a designer. That's just kind of something that happens. But to be able to lead properly, you kind of need to understand what everyone, at least on a surface level, what everyone's doing. So you need to understand how the programmers work and kind of what they're doing. And you also need to be able to understand what the artists are doing and how their pipeline works. So you can know, ultimately you just need to know how much what you can expect from everyone, so that you don't try to expect too much, but you also don't underestimate people. So that's kind of why a designer needs to know how to do everything. They need to be a very well-rounded person. And that's something that we highly encourage. It's always good, even if you're just a programmer, take a 3D art class. I did it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even if it's not something you want to do as all the time, it's really interesting and really fun to get more of a grasp on what the whole process is. The 247, right?
Yep.
MI 247, it's the introduction to 3D modeling and animation. Fantastic class. I highly, highly recommend it. That's one that Connor TAs and Sarah as well. It's an introductory class, so you don't have to know anything going in. I highly recommend it. Then on the same token, though, if you're an artist but you kind of want to understand more what the programmers are doing, take a programming class. It's a fair amount of work. I know the introduction programming class is CSE 231, but that's not a terrible course, and it will get you at least the concepts of how programming works and the mindsets that go into it. Even if it's not a language that you use in game development, it's still something that is useful to understand. But then the other two that I haven't talked about, audio usually ends up being, if you don't have someone on your team that already does audio, which is fairly common because there's not a lot of audio people, it usually ends up being the designer that will either write the music if he feels so inclined, or if he or she feels so inclined, or they will find royalty-free music and royalty-free sound effects and find sound that matches your game. And then the other thing is UI, user interface. That's usually something that ends up being a designer as well. And yeah, we'll have a UI talk in 2 weeks, I think. 2 or 3 weeks. So that'll be fun. But yeah, I think that's about it. As for these resources, SQLitis was the thing I was talking about with the guy who explained Mega Man really well, why Mega Man X is so awesome. I took some inspiration from him for a couple parts of this. He also did one on Castlevania versus Castlevania 2. There's only 4 SQLitis videos, which is really a shame because he's actually really good at analyzing what makes games good and bad. Let's dev with Greg. Greg Cosma is a graduate here. He went through the minor as an undergraduate and then stayed for grad school for 2 years. He graduated in the spring and just got a job out in Oregon. and he just left within the last month or so. But right after he left, he started doing this series of videos where it's just him and Unity, and he just goes through the process of developing a game. And it's really interesting, and you can really learn a lot from it. And then this is the book that you use in the game design course. It's actually, like, we joke about it a lot. I had a quote that I actually forgot to put in here. We joke a lot in our class, but in the end, it actually is really useful. It has chapters on the basics. It's not really a game development, so it doesn't really get into the programming or the art side of things, but it kind of talks a lot more about what I was talking about today. And then it has, in the second half of the book, it has entire chapters on genres of games. So like it has a chapter on like first-person shooters and then several other things as well. It's a textbook. You can probably find a PDF free somewhere if you try hard enough. But if you go into the minor, I recommend, like, it's a required textbook because you have quizzes on the book. So I would recommend getting it. Yeah, that's kind of it. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, kind of just to go off that game design book. So I rented that book from Amazon, and it was like pretty good, but like my rental expired, and now I wish I had that book again, just because it's really helpful to have like that resource right there for you.
Yeah.
So I would recommend purchasing it, or just finding it. And then I think there's also, what are the other game design books? There's like Level Up, and then there's, what's the one that Brian has like on display?
Ready Player One.
Okay.
That's
a fiction one. Though.
Fantastic book.
That is the one that you're thinking of, but
no,
that's not.
it's another one by like, is it Jesse Shell?
I don't know.
He's the author.
Is that Game Design Workshop?
Maybe, I don't know, but it's another good one. Yeah, there's a lot of good books out there.
Yeah, there's books for about anything you'd want to do, whether it's development or just design. Yeah. Any other questions at all? All right. Well, we will see you on Friday at the Game Jam.
Yeah.